your power over to an executive.
No, and that was a reason that I voted against the resolution as well, because we should not do that. But for political expediency's sake, and you hear that.
And that's an excuse that just it's like chalkboard, you know, you're just scratching your finger. I mean, because of expediency, we're giving our rights away because and that's the excuse that they're using to cram through bailouts and everything else. Oh, we just have to do it right now, you know.
And Congress can say, well, it's not my fault that we went to war in Iraq in an unjust war. It was the president's fault because we gave him that discretionary authority in this resolution. Well, you're not authorized in the Constitution.
So it is their fault.
It is. It is their fault. It is. And we should not have done that. We should be accountable to the people, according to the Constitution, for sending America's sons and daughters into harm's way, either in a just conflict or an unjust conflict. But now, as you've heard, this is all the president's fault. And I've voted against many of George Bush's legislative initiatives that he offered to Congress. But I must say that the president went to Congress and said, this is my evidence that is available through the intelligence community that I oversee. And he asked Congress, what do you think? And Congress, more than 3/4 of the United States Senate, more than 2/3 of the United States House, said, well, Mr. President, we see what you see, and here's the authority to go after Saddam Hussein, if you want to use that authority. And we've talked a little bit about this off camera, but the genius of the framers when they established the Constitution was to say, no, we're not going to give that authority to a king. We're going to give that authority to a Congress, which even at that time, one chamber was directly responsible to the people. And so a member of the House, even back in 1789, had to go to a neighbor's house and say, it was my decision that sent your son and today, or your daughter, into harm's way for this conflict. And then that parent, well, then everyone can determine if that son or daughter's life was lost in a just conflict, in a conflict whereby the way of life of the United States was imperiled, which is, in my opinion, the only reason why we sent
You know, the people are looking at Congress right now as just a gray matter. I mean, they don't stand for anything. So it's so wishy-washy. They just give away their responsibilities. You know, they gave away, you know, their authority to take care of our currency. You know, they gave that to the federal, and look where we are now. The Federal Reserve has just trashed our economy, and they're giving away their authority to determine if we go to war or not. And so that, again, they, like you said, they don't have to face the people. Supposedly, they don't have to feel guilt, but that guilt is going to follow them. I don't care, you know, how much time expires. That guilt is going to follow them.
I'm going to jump in here for a second because many have characterized the press and the freedom of the press as essentially a fourth arm of government. And I think we all know why, is that an informed electorate is the foundation for sound government. And obviously we have a little problem here in that apparently you had access to intelligence, and I think you're a fairly sane individual. You seem to connect the dots rather well, that it was fairly obvious to you and a handful of others in Congress that there was insufficient intelligence to justify going to war. And that would lead me to believe there should have been at least an equal percentage of the general populace from which you were elected who would have probably arrived at the same conclusion. And yet, the percentages in the public sector were beyond that. So do we have here by implication a fourth branch of government which is winding up being complicit in bad intelligence?
I think it is the case, Jim. A few weeks ago in California, the Politico.com, which is a website, an internet website-based news magazine, you might say, held a forum for journalists to talk about the campaign in 2008, presidential campaign in 2008. And one of the speakers, one of the participants in a roundtable, I guess similar to this, Mark Halperin from Time magazine, said that the lack of critical coverage and critical assessment of Barack Obama's campaign he had not seen such a woeful lack of critical assessment since the media's coverage in the run-up to the war in Iraq. So they're beginning to talk amongst themselves and asking themselves.
I think it even supersedes that. I really do.
What do you mean, Christine?
Oh, well, in regards to Obama, I mean, the fact that there have been several states that have filed lawsuits against, you know, the constitutional requirement, I mean, not against the requirement, but against Obama for not following the constitutional requirement of being a lawful born, natural born citizen. I mean, that's a requirement. Now, you know, we've got an attorney general from Pennsylvania who's well versed, has gone to, you know, handled cases, it's gone to the Supreme Court, and we're not talking about someone who's not very, you know, studied in this matter. We've got several states that have taken this on, yet we have not heard hardly any coverage following that or any push from the media to see proof of, you know, his natural born citizen paperwork. It's just not there. And yet they've gotten behind him and rallied and, you know, just worshipped him almost. It's just ridiculous.
And I think that's what Mr. Halperin was suggesting, maybe not just the idea of citizenship of the president, but if this is a question, it would have been in the past answered by the press. Yes. Either confirmed
they would have gone after
or denied. Yes, yes. And there was none of that. And that means that the Fourth Estate decided on their own that this particular issue was not worthy of a thorough vetting. And according to Mr. Halperin, he might not have been talking specifically about the citizenship issue, but in general, he said overall, the lack of critical coverage of Barack Obama's campaign, his viewpoints on issues, his record, his voting record, we haven't seen that since the lack of critical assessment of the intelligence or anything else to the run-up to the war in Iraq. And until that happens, I think you're going to see a continued diminution in the public's faith in the Fourth Estate. And they're going to start going to public access TV.